So, Brother Jerry, maybe this is a good place to segue into some conversation and dialogue.
Yeah.
And let me pose the first question, which is, certainly one can see this topic as one that invokes pessimism of the intellect, but we still have to figure out some optimism of the will. And so my question would be around the question of political agency. And in Ta-Nehisi Coates' I think, really powerful essay, he puts forward an argument for reparations, which is basically simply a moral claim. And I guess by way of analogy with reparations that Israel received from Germany after the Holocaust, his argument is that by laying out this moral claim, one can build a movement. What I imagine A. Philip Randolph would say in response is that a moral claim without a political strategy is a moral claim that won't be realized. Whatever else we want to say about the freedom budget, there was a political strategy there of creating a multiracial class alliance to move forward. And I would disagree with you a bit, Brother Jerry, that I think in 1965 it was not implausible. The civil rights movement was at its crest. In '64, the Johnson landslide brought all sorts of progressive Democrats into office. The labor movement was at a height that it has fallen from that point. And so that there were political agents that one could imagine that this was not utopian. You might not be successful, and there's reasons why it wasn't successful, particularly the Vietnam War, but it wasn't utopian. And so the question is, what lessons do we take away from those experiences? Even if I think it's clear, that one couldn't, bring the freedom budget to the Hill today and expect to have many people sign underneath it. What is the political strategy for moving forward these questions? And to all of you,
Can I jump in? And I don't want to say much in this discussion, but I want to put something on the table, partly in response to some of the stuff that's been said, and then I'm really interested in discussion coming from the audience. I think the freedom budget had a certain dead on arrival. It was dead on arrival back then, given the existing power structure. Given the existing power structure, it was dead on arrival. But the logic of it, there were several different pieces that it made sense. That power structure was being challenged by the civil rights movement. There was a powerful movement that was changing things with a tremendous moral energy and idealism, so that there was change taking place and possibilities of change opening up. There was a perspective of alliances, particularly alliances within the larger multiracial, multi-ethnic working class, struggling for black rights, for racial justice, linking that with the notion of a struggle for economic justice. It was possible to eliminate poverty doing the math. It was possible to do that, but it was not going to happen because of the given power structure. So if there was a challenge, a powerful enough challenge, it was conceivable that it could have been won. I think that and that link between racial justice and economic justice was and remains compelling. The necessity of that you can't have economic justice for whites, a majority of whites, let alone for a majority of blacks, without the struggle for for racial justice. The two are linked. There's a truth to that Randolph and the others grasped, and they were reaching for a strategy to win on that. Now, I think that what that would have meant was a kind of radical struggle in the streets, civil disobedience, mass struggle that would have been unpalatable to Democratic Party allies. And at a certain point, Randolph and others made, I think, a lethal choice, which was not to pose that kind of challenge, that kind of challenge. Then it was dead on arrival. Then it didn't have a chance. I think that King was reaching for a perspective, an orientation to keep on struggling along those lines. He was killed before he could find it, but he was reaching for it, and that's the challenge for us. Finding that kind of, developing that kind of struggle. Now, we're in a different moment in history. The capitalist economy is different, the politics are different, and I don't think we can just whip this together, because we'd like it to exist. But it would take that kind of struggle that they were reaching for and failed to find. It will involve mobilizing a working class majority around issues of racial and economic justice to win racial and economic justice in this country. It will involve taking on the power structures and forcing a major power shift, and that's not going to happen this year. And if there was that kind of struggle, then you might have a president or some other big shot making noises about racial justice and economic justice. Not even Barack Obama is doing that in the way that he should be doing. Well, there's not a movement to force him to do it. There's not a movement to force these people even to give lip service to that. But we don't need the lip service anyway. We need the change. And to bring about the kind of change, we have to put together a movement, a struggle that will truly go in the direction that the Freedom Budget was indicating. Right now, it's utopia. It's utopia, not going to happen. And there's no hope for this country. All of the negative stuff, absolutely true. All of the pessimistic stuff, absolutely true. But at a certain point, the shit's going to hit the fan. At a certain point, there will be struggles and uprisings and upsurges. And what we've got to do, I think, is to use some of these failed lessons from the past to put together the kind of strategy that we need, that some of these heroes and heroines from the past were reaching for. That's why I think it's worth looking at the Freedom Budget, even while recognizing the limitations that have been pointed out.
Patrick, you want to take a shot?
In the discussion of both the reparations movement and the Freedom Budget, these are really big things. And I think it's important to think about them in context of what happens in the case of both of these particular items, but also in comparison to other big things. Between 1954, maybe 1945, and 1974, the United States was transformed in a way that was beyond the imagination of most people. I mean, the notion of nonviolently ending, well, it wasn't nonviolent because a lot of people were killed. The people protesting was nonviolent, the opposition wasn't. But the notion of killing Jim Crow was like unimaginable to most people. It didn't seem like practical, even to a lot of people in the early 60s. I was born in 1958. And it's sort of like at the tail end of Jim Crow. I mean, schools in Florida weren't desegregated until 1970. But the notion that you could destroy Jim Crow in the South, I don't know if many people thought that Rosa Parks was igniting something that could eventually lead to that in the mid-1950s. That's a very big thing, because Jim Crow is a totalizing system. I mean, it's a totalitarian system. And ending totalitarianism on that level is usually about, beyond the imagination of most people. So when you think about something like the Freedom Budget or reparations, first of all, there have been reparations paid to other groups in the U.S. not just the Japanese Americans, but to various Native American groups. And there have been huge amount of academic work done on reparations, asking very important questions like, well, how much should be paid? Who should pay it? Who should be included? Is it possible? I mean, is it economically possible for the U.S. federal government to pay reparations to African Americans? And what would African Americans do with a sudden increase in wealth? Well, all those questions have been asked and studied, and there's an advantage to doing that. Number one, it creates a different vision. Number two, it creates an educational process about what's important. And the same thing is true with the freedom budget. It creates a different vision. You begin to have a discussion like, well, how would we have health care for everybody? How do you do that? That's a very practical question. How do you have college education for everybody? Well, actually, there's a very good idea for that. You have the Federal Reserve subsidize it, the same way they've been buying up $1 trillion in bad loans from the bank. Have the Fed buy up the current student loans that are out there. Does the Fed have the money to do that? Yeah, because they can write all the dollars they want to. Because they're the Fed. That's what they do. Can the U.S. do it? Well, Chile just announced free tuition for everybody in Chile. The Chilean economy is round-off era for the U.S. economy. No disrespect to Chile. They're a very small economy, very low-income country, and they're doing it. The Germans do it. So why can't we do it in the U.S.? The only reason we can't do it is not that it's politically impossible, but the political coalition hasn't been assembled yet.
You mean
So-
not that it's
Economically.
economically impossible?
No, I meant,
But politically right now,
No.
it is impossible.
well, everything is politically impossible until you do it.
Not
And
true, Bob.
sometimes you engage in a fight just because it's the right thing to fight about. And whether or not you win or lose is not really the determining factor. You fight as hard as you can, and then you achieve some objectives, and you may not get everything you want.
Or you may not get nothing. And that's all right.
Well,
if that's if
you
from-
will,
from
you
your
will
logic,
get
that's
you
all
will
right.
get nothing if you don't fight.
Right. But I'm trying to say,
All right,
I'ma
let's go to questions over
And
there.
comments.
I think the statistic about how it's worse in the north than the south is very indicative of trends that are going on that are despicable. I live in Gary, Indiana, and I used to live in Detroit.
Wow.
And nothing speaks louder than reality. And so on the one hand, I think the North is getting worse and worse. I don't think it's gonna change, because what I see is enormous migration north for industrial jobs. Industrial jobs disappear. What do we do with all these black people? Well, let's start arresting them, incarceration. Well, that didn't work enough. Maybe we need to kill some young people. But really what's happening is they want to push them out of the inner city, because they want to gentrify the inner cities. In Gary,
Yeah, that's happening.
they want the lakefront. And they don't want black people there. I mean, we have this influx in the neighborhood where I live of people from Chicago, and they complain all the time about too many black people, and what we need is upscale art district, and we need this and that. And what you said about the lack of moral empathy is really true. When they finally got the consent decree in Steele, for example, 1974, it led to a huge white reaction and division that was greater than ever, because none of those workers really thought that they should share the good jobs. And there's not very much education that is going on in that subject. When I wrote my book on black steelworkers, one of the main organizers kept repeating, yes, we need this broad coalition, we need to be, but if we go into that coalition before we get organized, we will always be on the bottom. And that's what I think is happening. I don't think we could have anything that would benefit most African Americans unless those people are organized. The civil rights movement was an example. They brought white people in because they needed the North to care if somebody got killed. And so I think that one of the problems now in this country, and it's clearly true in Detroit, Gary, and other places, black people who remain in the inner cities are being pushed out. They already gentrified downtown Philadelphia. They already gentrified, Bronzeville in Chicago. They pushed a lot of the poor blacks out. And so I think you're going to see a migration back to the South. And maybe we have to think about 40 acres and a mule. And I say that because Brazil has passed a law. It's only partial, and they are killing blacks in the cities just like here. But it says if you are an African descendant who has lived on this land historically, that land belongs to you. The government is providing supplemental food, health care, sending in apprenticeship trainers and things like that. And these quilombos have self-determination, autonomy, self-government, and without that, you don't have a base of power.
I really thought like what you said about like first step acknowledging people being in like the moral universe, poor black folks being part of the moral universe is like the first thing we need to do before we start even talking about reparations. But do you think that could be sort of like a chicken and egg argument, that like maybe there is some sort of social policy like that some bourgeois folks are thinking about that will then create a, I guess, greater nationwide empathy towards like, or at least some more policymakers thinking about poor black people? Because like randomly a month ago, Hillary Clinton, of all people, for some reason, talked about baby bonds as, which, you know, can be seen as a reparative economic policy. Will she actually talk about that in her campaign? Like, who knows?
Who knows?
But do you think that there is some sort of social or economic policy that is like reparation that could be amenable to pushing forward?
Lots of good things here. I'm like to agree with Professor Watts about the lack of empathy, I think particularly in the North by poor working class whites about the experience of African Americans in general, but especially poor African American people, especially men. I come from Appleton, Wisconsin, which is one of historically longest sundown towns in the nation. I think it was, which is a de facto form of segregation that keeps African Americans out of the city after dark. And I now live in Madison, Wisconsin, and have for 15 years. And I actually didn't, I mean, in my high school growing up, we only had 3 African American people, and I grew up being friends with them because they grew up in my neighborhood. And I didn't really understand what racism was until after college, actually. I didn't even really learn about white privilege until after I graduated from UW-Madison. And I'm a graduate student there now, and recently I'm a member of our graduate student union, the TAA, and I'm just about to start my 8th year of graduate school, so I've been there a long time. And I've been very encouraged recently by the efforts of the Young, Gifted, and Black Coalition in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a group of young people connected to the murder of Tony Robinson in our city, a gifted young man who I knew, and connected to movements in Ferguson and what have you. And what I've seen is that this movement is very much organized by young people, particularly high school students, and college students are following the movements of young high school students. And I do think that what I found from my work with ethnic minorities as college students is that they're a lot more educated than poor white students are about racism in America and about economic inequality in America. In fact, most poor white people don't really understand systems of economic injustice, let alone racial injustice. And so I think that really what it comes down to is education, and African American youth are educated for the most part, and those types of systemic inequalities, they might not have access in the same ways that they definitely should, need to, and deserve to higher education and so forth, but it's also poor white working class people that really have no idea what's going on, and I think that one way to sort of dig up any form of empathy is through education.
The two biggest advocates for baby bonds are actually a couple of friends of mine, Derek Hamilton at the New School and William Sandy Darity, who's at Duke.
I work for Sandy.
Oh, you were for Sandy? Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Now, when they started advocating baby bonds, there weren't a whole lot of people paying attention to that. So if Hillary Clinton is announcing that in her campaign, that's kind of an example of how a thing can move from being politically impossible, in fact, even unheard of, to now you have a presidential candidate speaking about it. And on the issue of reparations, Dig America up there, written about reparations, talked about reparations more than anybody else that I know.
Who's that?
The distinguished gentleman there with the mustache and gray hair. Been writing about reparations for generations, in fact.
Not that long.
I became aware of the reparations debate like the late 70s, the 80s from a lot of my friends from Detroit. And that discussion, as I said, there have been a lot of activity around that. And in fact, I think in part Derek and Sandy became interested in the issue of baby bonds out of their attachment to the issue of reparations. And so sometimes you focus on one question and it gives you a way of framing another question. Because at the end of the day, what reparations is about redistribution of wealth, which is now within the public debate. And the question is, how do we do it? How do we redistribute wealth? Because people recognize that the current process of increasing inequality and wealth is very harmful to the majority of people in this country. And so reparations is how do we redistribute wealth, and how do we in particular deal with the issue of inequality in black-white wealth. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the possibilities of change. It's just a matter, as I said, of keep focusing and getting the right coalition of people to bring about the policy.
Last word.
I think this has been a good initial discussion. I'd like to ask all of you to stay about 5 more hours so we can really get going. And the discussion must continue and will continue for a while. And we've got to draw on many different insights, questions, challenges, and so forth in order to put together what we must put together to overcome the kinds of problems that we've been discussing. I appreciate your presence in this discussion.
Brother Watts?
I don't, listen, I'm not naturally so pessimistic. That's a damn lie. I should stop lying like that. I am pessimistic, goddamn. Listen, we live in a country, the Supreme Court has ruled on the corporations thing about that. Listen, we are in the worst reactionary moment in American history in recent time, right? If we can just hold our head above water, the hell with them redistributing income. Hell, I'm trying to keep our elections from being outright bought. We are that bad. The thoroughly anti-democratic nature of our system is not to be, that's it. And then Obama went around here and was able to collect a lot of money. That should have indicated to me that there was something like problematic about the brother, right? No, I'm very serious. Because I knew something was up with that, like, yes, we can. Yes, we can what, goddaggit? Yeah, we can protect Wall Street. But but certain things happen that I'm optimistic about. I was, however, utopian, and I call it utopian, but I did think there was some really great energy around Occupy.
Yeah.
And it was linked to a whole range of stuff, right? That the issue is, though, it's easy for those kinds of energies to dissipate if there's no structure to step in and say, listen, we're going to try this as a moment of articulating, right? Because it'll just be like, it becomes like nostalgic. Yeah, man, we did this. Not that we won any damn thing, but we did this, right? And that's what we have to figure out, like how, that's why I say, stay away from catharsis. If it makes you feel good, you know you're screwing up. Because the capitalists are winning in this country. No, I'm very serious. But there was some energies there. Another thing, by the way, I just want to say this, well, I am always shocked when they show the studies of the demographic changes in America around gay marriage support. And they said, boy, listen, and the younger population is, in fact, more supportive, right? We ain't gonna get no earthquake like, I mean, what Ireland did the other day for me was like phenomenal, right? Like 62% of the damn voting, I was like, God dang. I know the Pope was going crazy. Or not, I shouldn't say the Pope, but some of the cardinals. The Pope might be closetly clapping, I don't know. But I'm saying, you know, there's some moments of opposition out here around like gay marriage. I would have never thought that would have gotten off the ground like that. But when we challenge, but the Supreme Court has gone so reactionary, right? And I'm just amazed that, you know, what are we gonna do? We have to generate some kind of opposition to this, because we can't keep calling this system democratic. It's like open oligarchy, right? And we can put faces on those brothers. What are those brothers? You know, those two thug Koch brothers, yes. But I'm like, hell, we got bigger thug class than that. No, but you follow me? But it's like, what do we do? This is like open season on any kind of potentially democratic political system in this country. And and I don't know, that's despairing to me. But don't give up.
Right.
I'll say all of that.
So I think we've overstayed our time a little already. I want to thank you for coming, particularly those of you who are in the DC area. Leave us your email so we can let you know of other events that we're organizing that you might be interested in. There's a sign-in sheet on the way out. Thank you very much for coming.